Hi, my name is Mary Ellis, and my report is on the beguine movement. Beguines were religious laywomen who found middle ground in between the rigid structures of being a nun and the equally rigid structure of being a wife and a mother. Some scholars have referred to them as the world's first feminists, and others have referred to them as the freest women of the Middle Ages, which is a term that I've borrowed here. Because even though no woman in the Middle Ages could rightly be called free, beguines were able to reach a level of independence that was unheard of for a woman before this time, and they took part in a true social revolution. The movement began in the early 1200s in the Low Countries, which are comprised of modern day Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. And then they quickly spread out to the surrounding areas of northern France and Germany. The reason that the movement began in this area is attributed to two things. One, to a woman who was considered the first beguine, and a group of like-minded women sprang up around her. But the other, and probably even more important reason, is because of the unique economy of this area. So three social conditions are really converging to create this movement. So the first is the economic uniqueness of this area. Unlike the rest of Europe, which is based on the manorial system, the Low Countries have these really rapidly expanding towns that are based on the cloth and wool industry. So population growth has, skyrocketed, which is creating a lot of jobs, primarily for women, because this is the textile industry and this is the kind of work that women have always done. But just the fact that the population has gotten so big creates other jobs as well, like nursing, midwifery, and domestic work. So women have a lot of opportunity in this area for employment that they don't have across the rest of Europe. The other aspect is that traditionally women would either get married and have a family or they would become nuns. But because of the Crusades, there's almost constant warfare. So men of marriageable age become pretty scarce. So a lot of women who would have chosen that life for themselves find themselves unable to. So then they try to become nuns, but because so many women have become nuns already, all the convents are filled up, and the church starts requiring very large donations to become a nun. So women find themselves really without their two options that they normally would have relied upon. So we've got this economic opportunity, and we also have this social necessity kind of meeting each other, which explains why this movement happens where it does. But that doesn't explain why it has this religious tone to it. And that's a result of just the religious flavor of the day. At that time, people were really beginning to question the authority of the church. And, if you look at it kind of like a precursor to the Protestant Revolution, that's something that didn't spring up overnight. It was hundreds of years in the making. And it really starts with the feelings people are getting here at this moment in time in the late 1100s, the early 1200s, with a lot of groups that the church will deem heretical and will quickly stamp out. But it indicates kind of the general feeling that a lot of people were having, that they wanted to define Christianity for themselves and practice it in their own way, outside of the very strict authority of the church. And so the Beguines, they were lay women who wanted to conduct themselves religiously in the manner of the life of Christ, according to his example. But they wanted to define that for themselves and not have it defined for them. So when you put all three of these things together, you have necessity, opportunity, and and autonomy. You have the desire for women to lead a religious yet independent life according to the way that they see fit. The first beguine is considered Marie de Oignies, and she wasn't the first woman to live this kind of lifestyle that the beguines did, but she was the first to have a cult following and to attract a group of like-minded women around her. So this is why the movement became structured as opposed to just a woman here and a woman there leading this kind of religious layperson lifestyle. Rather, it turned into communities of women. And that's pretty much because of Marie and the crowd that she attracted around her. So even though she did end her years as an anchorite in a cell attached to a church, uh, through her life, she was known as a prophetess, a mystic, someone who could heal the sick. So she did attract a great deal of attention, and works were written about her, including a very famous one by a man who later became a cardinal. So he gave a lot of legitimacy to her and to this burgeoning movement. And it's a lot of what beguines look like and what they do can be traced to Marie because she kind of set the standard there for later beguines as far as what practices they would use and how they would conduct themselves. So maybe partly in thanks to Marie and how she lived, beguines look an awful lot like nuns. They dress very modestly and drably. They live a chaste lifestyle. They do charitable works, including ministering to the sick and the poor, including lepers. But there are a lot of differences. One of the most important ones is the fact that beguines do not take a vow of poverty. So they're able to keep their own money, which is very attractive if you are a widow who has some money. If you were to remarry, you're going to lose control of all of your assets, but if you become a beguine, you're holding on to that. So you're able to keep your money. They're building their own homes. They're spending their money how they want, generally on creating these communities together. And they can leave. They can stop being a beguine at any time. And many of them do, sometimes to get married and sometimes to become nuns, although you could leave for any reason. So there's a great deal of freedom involved in being a beguine. Another important distinction between them is that while nuns are off in convents and they're kind of cloistered there and separate from society, beguines are within a community and they're ministering to the people, which garnered them a lot of popularity. The people loved them because they were doing things for them, helping the sick and the poor, starting hospitals, taking in orphans and child prostitutes. They really were extremely helpful to the community. So they had a lot of popular support, and that's part of what protected beguines, whereas other groups were very quickly deemed heretical. Beguines were able to stick around quite a bit longer because they did have so much popular support. Not all beguines lived together, but most of them did, and this was the most practical way for them to get by, is they built houses together in little communities within one of these larger towns. And so these were essentially towns within towns. And they all had pretty much the same structure. It's these houses with an inner courtyard, connected inner courtyards. And each town would have a chapel. That was an integral feature. But they also could have things like breweries and bakeries. Some even had their own hospitals. And the women worked in these different industries within the beguinage. And they also worked within the town, the larger town itself. And these are really beautiful examples of just a few of them that are now on UNESCO World Heritage, their UNESCO World Heritage sites because of their historical importance. However, even though the Beguines were very popular with the people, they were quickly considered a threat by the church, and it's understandable that they were. For one thing, they wrote and translated scripture in the vernacular. One of the things that separated beguines from nuns is that they did not have to say the matins. And that gave them so much free time to do things like study the vernacular. So that you see a lot of beguines writing texts in the vernacular and disseminating them amongst the people. And that was a big no-no at the time because you're circumventing the authority of the church by not using Latin. Another thing is that they discuss theology amongst themselves. And at first, that was considered just kind of a bit of a joke by the church, the idea of women, inferior women, discussing theology. But when people actually started to listen to what they had to say, then that became a threat. Another issue that goes along with that is many of them were critical of the church and the clergy. So all of these things combined are starting to put them on the church's radar, and the number one thing that really made it difficult for the Beguines to last is that they were espousing this idea that people could experience God directly. And that is an idea that would put the church out of business. So the more and more that they did this, the more and more it became that the church was harassing them and trying to take away their rights up to the point that they finally deemed the entire movement heretical and outlawed it at the threat of excommunication or even execution. So I'd like to conclude with a comparison of two very famous female mystics who were also Beguines, and they have quite a lot in common. The first is Mechtilde of Magdeburg, and she wrote the autobiographical The Flowing Light of the Godhead. And that is a text that details her mystical marriage to Christ. This is an extremely erotic text, using a lot of the literary techniques that were very popular in her time, primarily the literature of courtly love. So it's almost like a love story about her and Christ. And being that it is so erotic, you might think that this is something that would get her in a lot of trouble with the church. But interestingly, it didn't because it's really based on a long tradition of biblical writing that does deal with God in these kinds of terms and in that kind of language. So in books like Song of Songs and the Book of Psalms, you do get a lot of that kind of strangely erotic language discussing God. And all she's really done here is transfer that to a relationship with Christ. So the church overlooked that, even though it was a bit, even by my modern standards, I did find that all a bit saucy. Marguerite Porete, however, was condemned by the French Inquisition as a heretic and burned at the stake in 1310. So her text, The Mirror of Simple Annihilated Souls and Those Who Only Remain in Will and Desire of Love, which is generally referred to as The Mirror of Simple Souls, was very similar to Mechtilde's text. They were both about mystical marriages to Christ. Marguerite's was actually quite a bit tamer. The difference is statements like the quote that I have up here, where Marguerite says things like, the liberated soul doesn't see God through penitence nor through any sacrament of Holy Church. So, with language like that, what she's doing is undermining not just the authority of the church, but its very reason for existence. So, you can't go around saying things like that without incurring the wrath of the church. And when she refused to stop publishing her books and spreading this message, they did condemn her to death. So Marguerite, in many ways, mirrors the Beguine movement in general. Um, I don't think she should be looked at for the way that her life ended, just like the Beguines shouldn't be looked at for the way their movement ended, but they should be celebrated for having this level of independence and freedom, not just in what they did, but freedom in the way that they thought, in spite of great opposition during a period when to be a free thinker, and to live life according to your own conscience, um, oftentimes got you in a lot of trouble with society and with the church. So I think Marguerite and Beguines in general were all very brave women, and I'm glad to have learned about them. And I feel like modern women are really indebted to these kinds of women who were trailblazers and were very brave, and carved out a path, I think, for all of us in the future.